Hello, everyone. This is Scott Spratt from Pro Football Focus. This is another episode of the Fantasy Slant, the Pro Football Focus podcast that touches on everything from redraft to dynasty to maybe even a little IDP today. I'm joined, as always, by Michael Moore. Michael, how are you today?
Good. How are you, man?
Doing great. The main objective of our show today is Michael and I are going to do a little two-man mock draft. We're going to hit the first two rounds of a rookie draft for a dynasty league. So as if it was a 12-man league in PPR formats, we're just going to go through talk through 24 picks and why we're picking them. Neither of us know who the other's going to pick, so it's going to be some actual decision-making going on the air. But before I get there, there actually is a bit of news that is especially pertinent to dynasty leagues, and I thought that that would be the best place to start. So the first two items I have on my list here are actually both Packers-related, and the first is a little bit of sad news, and that is that Jonathan Franklin's career appears to be over because of a neck injury. The team released him a couple of days ago. Last year he was a fourth-round pick, and I mean, people aren't going to really remember this now because Eddie Lacy he really cemented himself as the best player in that draft coming out among the running backs at least, and is now a top 5 dynasty player for most people. But at the time, Lacy was slipping a little bit. I think he was getting some bad juju from some of his former Alabama running backs that were making him seem a little bit worse by comparison. None of them have really worked out until Lacy in the NFL. And then Franklin was rising up a lot of boards, and it seemed like a real steal in the draft for the Packers in the 4th round. And, Michael, I mean, I really remember that 13-carry, 103-yard performance that he had in Week 3 against Cincinnati when he was very impressive. And to me, at that time, I was wondering if this might be a little bit of a committee going forward, especially because Franklin had such a great, I'd say, a prospect as a receiver. Reminded me a little bit of Jabba Best in a sense, and, you know, it's kind of sad that his career ended too quickly as well. So, Michael, I mean, I guess there's probably not much analysis for you to give on Franklin here, but I have moved James Starks into my top 200 in dynasty rankings overall to 163, moved him into my top 60 at 58 at running back, right between Andre Brown and Stephen Taylor. So to me, this really clears up a backfield that I thought was uncertain after Eddie Lacy, who is obviously one of the most certain players. What do you think about maybe James Starks, or what do you remember about Franklin's career?
Yeah, you know, I seem to recall that even in preseason and training camp, there was some talk of Franklin starting and being the better rookie between him and Lacy. I mean, I think we all probably remember the Eddie Lacy is overweight stories that were coming out of camp last year. So, yeah, it's really sad. I mean, like you said, he showed some flash there in Week 3. And at the very least, I think people thought he could be a change of pace guy. I mean, I don't think Eddie Lacy's ever going to fool anyone with his hands, and they thought, hey, maybe Franklin can be that sort of third down option for Green Bay. But yeah, but like you said, it clears up, I think, a lot of questions on who's going to be the primary backup to Eddie Lacy now with James Starks there. And even this week, I think I've seen reports that said James Starks looks pretty good in camp by himself. So yeah, it's really sad, but it definitely clears up at least one more running back situation.
Now, even without Franklin on the Packers, they still have plenty of guys to catch passes this year. But one name that seems to be doing particularly well in the workouts right now is Richard Rodgers, a 6'4", 257-pound tight end out of Cal, who, I mean, face it, wasn't really considered much of a prospect going into the draft. I don't think he was in the top 10 at tight end among like most of the ranking agencies. But the Packers clearly liked him. They drafted him. He wasn't really on my radar as of a week ago, but the way that he's doing now, and I mean, really, of all the situations in the NFL, the Packers have to be the one where there's the most uncertainty at tight ends coupled with the most potential. And so, I mean, 2 weeks ago I told you that Colt Laierlo was a relevant sleeper, and he may still be, but at this point, the uncertainty, I'm willing to sort of chase the hot story here, and I've actually moved Rodgers to 35th at my tight end ranking. So I think you're talking about pretty deep dynasty leagues, but worth a consideration, Michael?
I think so. You know, I think that whole Green Bay tight end situation is going to be a flavor of the week kind of thing. I think, you know, there's going to be weeks where, you know, Rodgers is the hot hand, and then there's weeks that Laierler's the hot hand, and then, hey, Brandon Bostic could even make a comeback. I don't know. But, yeah, I think at the moment, if you were drafting right now in dynasty leagues, I think Rodgers is probably the guy to own. But I mean, we got a long way to go. So look, and you're right. Whoever does win that job, you know, pretty much has the golden ticket because that position on that team is very valuable for whoever wins out on that.
Definitely something for every dynasty owner to keep an eye on, especially because the presumptive starter, Andrew Parlis, is really a blocking specialist and really probably won't be a factor as a pass catcher. And maybe that'll sort itself out over the next few weeks, but keep an eye on that. All right, so for longtime listeners of this 3-week show, it's everyone's favorite time of the week, and that's the Jimmy Clausen watch. So, Michael, I'm going to give the floor to you. I think you have someone to challenge my Jimmy Clausen love with.
Yeah, I really went deep on this one, Scott. I tried to find out who out there could possibly give Jimmy Clausen a run for his money, and I think I have him. So we're going to play a game called Over or Under. Okay, so you got to choose over or under when I give you a statistic relating to this player. Okay?
Okay, I'm excited.
Okay. The year is 2011, by the way. Did this quarterback have a above or below a 5.5 yards per attempt?
Oh, you're going to make me play blind. I don't even know who the player is.
Yeah.
Ooh. Okay, I mean, I'm going to say...
I'm building it up, Scott. There's build-up here.
I'll say over. That's a pretty low yard per attempt number.
Ooh.
Off to a bad start.
You would be incorrect, my friend. It's 5.3 yards per attempt. Okay, and this is for a full season. We're not talking about 1 or 2 games here.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, next. Above or below a quarterback rating of 70?
Okay, 70, that's not terrible. I mean, wasn't Clausen like a 20 or something? I don't know. Under.
It is under 65.3 quarterback rating.
Okay.
So
still not very good.
No. And finally, above or below a completion percentage of 55%.
Oh, man. I feel like you shouldn't even be allowed to be a starter if you have a 55% completion percentage. So I'm going to say under.
You are correct. That would be 50.8%.
Oh, no.
Now, any guesses on who that quarterback is? It was 2011.
Yeah, when the game started, I was thinking maybe you were going with another Panthers legend and Matt Moore. But I think at that point he was on the Dolphins, and I don't think he was starting. Ooh. I don't know. I really don't know.
Okay. Think of, Scott, your fellow. What team did Carolina come into the league with?
The Jaguars.
There you go.
Are you going there?
There you go. So who is it? Who is that Jimmy Clausen lookalike?
Blaine Gabbert, former top 5 pick.
Ding, ding, ding. Yes.
Yeah,
he was fantastic. He was, and how I found him, ironically, if you go to the Pro Football Focus site and go to the ratings, if you are a member, he had the worst quarterback rating of any quarterback since they started keeping track at Pro Football Focus with a negative 49.2 rating. So it was pretty epic. I'm not going to lie. But I can't really say anything because he's now on my favorite team backing up Colin Kaepernick. So I can only pray that they don't have to see what he's like.
It's funny how players like that end up on new teams and teams that are really good, and all of a sudden they're sleeper potential. So
right.
I think Gabbert and Clausen should both be fun from that respect. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Clausen's climbing up the charts, man. He's, impressing, legitimately. So
I'm going to laugh all the way to the bank on that. So. I also think it's probably a little funny to consider that Gabbert was really the prototypical toolsy quarterback that was taken in the 2011 draft. So I'm sure our 3 Jacksonville Jaguars fans that are listening, they're probably really thrilled considering how similar Bortles and he are from that respect. So we'll have to see if Jacksonville can pull it out in the next couple of years.
Yeah, no disrespect to the Jaguars fans, believe me. So
yeah, good times. Okay. Anyway. Before we get to that rookie draft that I teased at the beginning of the show, I also want to mention that Michael recently wrote an article on Pro Football Focus covering a couple of rookie IDP sleepers. We don't spend a lot of time on, or really any of our podcasts, talking about IDP, but people that are in the games as deep as we are probably love IDP. I would say 75% of my leagues are, in fact, IDP. That stands for individual defensive players, for anyone that's not familiar with it, and it's a really rich way to add to games if you're getting a little bored of just the standard, let me just pick 45 running backs and stream them until I get somebody good strategy. This actually adds a bit of depth to the game. And you picked a couple of my favorites, Michael. In fact, both Christian Kirksey and Telvin Smith in Cleveland and Jacksonville, respectively, 2 linebackers who I'm ending up with in a lot of teams because, frankly, in rookie drafts, when I'm in the 4th and 5th round, I'd rather take a gamble on those guys who have a chance to start and maybe get 75 to 100 tackles as soon as this year than pick the fourth running back on some random team that's probably never going to play it down in his career. So what are you saying about those guys? Do you have a clear preference between the two? And where do they fit in your overall, say, IDP top 10 or top 20?
Yeah. So the first one is Christian Kirksey from Cleveland, linebacker out of Iowa. He doesn't necessarily do any one thing very well, but he just had a very productive, good college career and seemed to have a good nose for the ball. So, being drafted by Cleveland, any linebacker on Cleveland is going to have some value with Mike Pettine there. So that's a guy to look out for. And like you said, he could potentially start right away. There's not much competition there at that position. So the other guy that I'm pretty high on, like you mentioned, was Telvin Smith of Jacksonville, who he's got some big-time potential, I think. He had a lot of potential going into the draft and into the combine out of Florida State, failed a drug test along with some other Florida State players, and saw his stock really drop before Jacksonville finally took him. But since then he's kept his head on straight, and he's kind of one of those tweener guys where they were wondering if he could play safety, play linebacker, but they're going to stick with him at linebacker, and trust me, he's got the speed of a safety. So he could be a guy that could rack up a lot of tackles real quick for you. So overall, you obviously have the top guys at linebacker, the Shazirs and the Mosleys, and these guys are not that by any means. But if you're starting to get into a top 5 linebacker or top 10 rookie linebacker, I think these two guys could be good guys for you.
I swear every comparison I make isn't going to be to the Panthers, but Smith reminds me a little bit of Thomas Davis, who was sort of a safety linebacker tweener that has really panned out even after some career-threatening injuries, multiple ACL tears, in fact, I think, for the Panthers.
He's a human. He's a freak of nature, is what
he really is. And I could see Smith putting up those kind of tackle numbers even as an outside linebacker for the Jaguars in the future. Whereas Kirksey, I think, is definitely the safer pick and the one that's going to probably start more quickly, maybe as soon as week 1. But I'm questioning whether he's a 3-down linebacker in the future. The third guy you mentioned is Chris Borland in San Francisco, who is a particularly interesting player given that Navarro Bowman hurt himself late in the playoffs last year for the 49ers. And next to Patrick Willis, it's really easy to look good and be productive. I mean, teams scheme away from him. He's so good. So Borland could be sort of a shotgun starter here and maybe be very productive in the first half of the 2014 season for you.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to get a shot. It's essentially between him and Michael Wilhoit, who, quite frankly, up to this point hasn't done a whole lot. So, with Borland, at least you've got a guy that was drafted fairly high in the 3rd round by San Francisco. And, yeah, like you said, there's a big hole there in the middle with Bowman out. So I think if Borland does what I think they drafted him to do and sticks with it, I think, yeah, he could rack up some tackles pretty early. Now, it's a question on his long-term potential, because if Bowman comes back and looks like his old self, that sort of puts Borland in a tough spot there. But hey, it's not like Patrick Willis is getting any younger either. So yeah, I think Borland's a guy that you could, if you've got taxi squads or a pretty deep roster, I think he's definitely a guy to hold on to.
Point of interest, Michael Wilhoit, I believe, was selling shoes 2 or 3 years ago. So he's having a nice.
And that's all you need to know.
Hey, I mean, good for him. I hope it really works out for him. But that probably does give the advantage to Borland, at least in the long term, as a guy with.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, don't get me wrong. Wilhoit's a good player. I mean, he stood out on special teams, and quite frankly, that's how he made the team and stuck around. So, but look, Borland's got a pretty good pedigree out of Wisconsin. And I think he's probably going to end up winning that job in the long run.
Okay, Michael, I think we better go ahead and get to this, or else the show is going to be over before we even have a chance. So I mentioned at the top that we're going to do a rookie draft for a dynasty league, going through rounds 1 and 2. We're talking about standard scoring except for PPR, so there's nothing else fancy going on there. This will apply to a lot of your leagues, and we'll probably touch a little bit on players that if we think they're overvalued or undervalued, particularly in a PPR format relative to standard. And obviously one of the major factors in picking your rookie players has to do with your own roster composition. And since Michael and I are just two guys going back and forth here, we don't really have any rosters to play off of. So this is going to just be strictly value in a vacuum, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to look at it as best player available, just all the way down, pretty much.
Yes. So, I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter which one of us goes first, but since I'm the host of the show, I'm going to go first. That's the advantages of talking first.
Fair enough.
Of course, first two picks, I don't think it really. We've touched on this briefly, and I think both of us are going to get the player we wanted with our first picks. So the real issue is the pick 3. But at pick 1, I'm going to take Sammy Watkins, and at pick 2, I think I know who you're going to take there too.
Yeah, believe me, no one has the urge more at times to get cute with your picks, but I think you just got to be safe and go Mike Evans on that. And look, is he going to produce, I think, as quickly as a Sammy Watkins? Probably not, but I mean, just the talent and just the ability are just incredible. So yeah, I'd go Evans at 2.
I don't actually have this in front of me, so I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head, but I think there's a multi-round drop-off after those 2 players to the rest of really the rookie wide receivers. And then I think you can debate whether or not one of the running backs fits in at their level or anything close because of his situation. And I'm talking about Bishop Sankey, who is going to be my pick at number 3. He may not have the long-term upside of several of the other wide receivers to come, or even maybe as Carlos Hyde and 1 or 2 other of the running backs. But landing in Tennessee, where Chris Johnson no longer is, where they don't really have anyone else that's all that attractive, although, I mean, Sean Green is there and has been a top 20 running back before, despite everybody sort of laughing at his lack of ability. He's a big guy that stayed fairly healthy in his career. But Sankey seems like he has the opportunity to start immediately, get 20 touches a game immediately, could be a top 20 running back immediately. And for me, that means you need to take him at 3, especially because there are not a lot of other obvious running backs that you can get in this draft to help you this year.
Yeah, and I think that's a very underrated aspect of who you pick in rookie drafts is their ability to start right away. Because rookie drafts, I think we can agree, are mostly about who's got the best potential and who's got the most upside. But at the end of the day, you still have to play this season. And if there's one clear-cut guy at a position that's going to start over the rest, like Sankey, yeah, I can't really fault you for that. I really can't. So with that said, God, I'm a big Jordan Matthews guy. I'm not saying I'm taking him, but the pick between a him and a Cooks is just really close for me. But I think at this point, using the logic I just espoused, meaning more likely to start and be productive right away, I think I got to go Cooks here. I think he's going to probably start right away in New Orleans, and by all indications, they've got big things planned for him. So I think in that offense, I think he's going to do quite well. So I'd take him at 4.
I definitely think that's a smart play there, and it has more to do with what I'm seeing as sort of the dynasty consensus at this point. And there's a lot of variability in rankings I've seen between guys like Odell Beckham, Kelvin Benjamin, Jordan Matthews, Cody Latimer, all those guys. And I think there's a chance that any of them could slip outside of the top 6 or 7 picks. And that means, it's a little bit of a risk if you really want Matthews specifically. You may not really end up in a situation like this where you would have multiple top picks. But I find it very hard to believe that Cooks will fall beyond, say, 5, just because of the high-powered offense that he ended up in. Nobody has questions about Drew Brees and company. So I think that is the correct play of a conservative player. And trust me, nobody loves conservative football playing more than me. Being serious. So that leaves me in a tough situation because I know that you want Matthews with your next pick, but he's not the guy on my board at this spot in the draft. The guy that I have number 4 in my dynasty rankings is Odell Beckham. And rather than sort of play off of what I know about you and try to wait it out and see how late I can get him, I'm just going to go ahead and take him because I get that he may not have number 1 wide receiver upside in the long term, but Eli Manning has been a bit of a star maker so far in his career, and I know it all fell apart for him last year, and it could just blow up in his face. But if that happens, then the Giants can move on, and then Beckham can maybe help down the line. But I think there's a real chance that Beckham makes a positive impact this year. And as quickly as Victor Cruz came onto the scene, he's not really young anymore. So I'm wondering if Beckham might have a bit of a future as sort of a slot player in the long term when he may be able to get a catch volume that sort of elevates him to perennial top 20 wide receiver status. So that's all I'm going to say there. I think that you can probably get Beckham later in some drafts, but to me there's not an obvious pick at this point.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. Beckham, I think in a vacuum is one of the top receivers. I mean, even probably better than a Cooks. His route running was very good. He's very polished. I mean, I think, as far as being NFL ready, he's probably up there as far as receivers go. So I can't, I think he's going to be one of those guys, sort of like a guy later on that one of us will pick that will probably be pretty polarizing, meaning you could have a guy that takes him, 3 or 4, and you could, like you said, have a guy that takes him late in the first round. It just really depends on need and just how much in love you are with Odell Beckham. So, but I am not as in love with Odell Beckham as I am with Jordan Matthews. So that's going to be an easy one for me. I just like the reports coming out of camp. I mean, they're lining him up all over the field, and look, now they're saying he could potentially, be their number 1 guy by season's end. And in that offense, and given the limited time they had last year to be fully functional, to have a rookie in that offense at receiver, I think, is pretty valuable. So I would take Matthews here at 6.
Okay, I like that pick there too. I'm going to go a little bit off my own board here and pick Carlos Hyde of the 49ers. To me, he's a bit of a standout ahead of the rest of the running backs on the board, and it certainly is not because of opportunity, because the 49ers have a bit of a log jam. They still have Frank Gore, who is still a great player. They have the former SC back, whose name escapes me at the moment, suffered from some knee injuries, but could be coming back. I'm blanking on it. Lattimore. I blank on someone every show. I mean, I'm totally unreliable. But Hyde has a ton of talent. Many people thought he was the best running back in this class. He's the one that certainly has the body of a workhorse back more than anyone else. And while I'm kind of terrified about the 49ers offense becoming like the Panthers, where there's 3 really talented backs that none of which can really emerge because they're just sharing the load, I think I'm going to take the gamble on the player with that kind of upside at this point in the draft.
Yeah, Hyde's. I really like Hyde too. I think just today they said he could end up taking the ball, being the primary ball carrier by the season's end. So yeah, I think getting a guy like that, especially in a good young offense like San Francisco's, is a pretty good value there. And yeah, he's a guy that could, while maybe not start right away, could see a lot of playing time pretty early. So yeah, I think you can get some pretty good value out of that. So. All right, so after that, now that I think we can agree the top 2 running backs are gone, top 2 receivers are gone, or no, 4 receivers now are gone. No, 5, I'm sorry. I'm probably going to go tight end here with Eric Ebron. I think, being at 8, I think if you can get him at 8, I think that's a pretty good value, especially considering how important tight end has been becoming really over the last couple of years. And I think Ebron's got the talent to be really special. Now, is he going to be that way this year? I think the jury's still out on that. But, hey, look, they drafted him with a top 10 pick despite re-signing Brandon Pettigrew and having Joseph Fourier on the roster. So they obviously think a lot of him, and I think, sooner or later he's going to get his opportunity. So I think if you can get him at 8, like I did just now, I think that's a good value.
Frankly, I expect Ebron to go a couple of picks sooner than that in most drafts. I've already made it clear that I'm not in love with Ebron as a prospect, but certainly have no hesitation there in saying that that's a solid pick and it's a good value pick, given where I would expect him to go in the way that he could potentially become a trade asset for you down the line. And again, I can't really throw stones here because with my pick, which is I think the 9th overall so far in my rookie pick, I'm going to take another boomer bust prospect, and that's Kelvin Benjamin of the Carolina Panthers. This is not a pick for the faint of heart because it could definitely bust. But Benjamin is a physical talent, and if everything goes well for him, then he could become a Demaryius Thomas type of player. He has those physical tools, and he has that opportunity in Carolina where, as we've mentioned, they don't really have any quality pass catchers. Jericho Cotchery is currently the number 1 receiver. I guess Greg Olsen is the number 1 receiver. But the point is that there is an opening there for someone like Benjamin to step in and be great. We just have to hope that that becomes more like Demaryius Thomas and less like Stephen Hill. But the potential is there, and this late in the first round, I'm eager to jump on that.
Yeah, he definitely could make an impact right away, that's for sure. And at least in the red zone, I think he's probably going to get some looks pretty early. So, yeah, and I think that's another guy, that I alluded to earlier that, you could have him drafted really high or, completely fall off your rookie draft. So there I think is probably a happy medium for him. For me at 10, I'm going to get some flack for this, but I'm probably going to go Jace Amaro from the Jets. Look, I know I'm not in the majority here, but I think, with what he does, with all he does is catch the ball, and I don't think that for a rookie tight end, you could have landed in a better situation. Not Detroit, not Tampa Bay. Look, he's already the number 2 target there, and all the reports are Geno Smith somehow is improving and looks to be getting better. And I think if he can play like he did in the Jets' wins last year, rather than their losses, I think Amaro is going to be really, really good. Really early, too. I think he probably is going to contribute the most out of all the tight ends, at least his rookie year. So, if I got Amaro at 10, for me personally, I'd be pretty happy.
Definitely agree with you on the short-term need for the Jets at tight end. I agree that Amaro will be of the 3 major tight ends, he's the one that could produce for you most quickly. So in that sense, I definitely like the pick. I will say that in many rookie drafts, he's not going inside the top 15. That's not a criticism of your pick. It's just a suggestion that you may be able to snag him in the middle of the second round with the pick. And if you're correct about this, Michael, then I think that could be a really huge value there. Definitely don't hate you swinging for him that early in the first round either. That actually leaves me in a bit of a tricky situation because I was hoping you were going to make a couple of decisions for me. So I'm going to have to pick among multiple wide receivers here that all have a chance to be good. And I'm going to go with Cody Latimer of Denver. We've mentioned in previous weeks that a lot of Denver's pass catchers could potentially become free agents down the line within another year, in fact. Wes Welker is the one that I think has the chance to really open it up for Latimer. It could be interesting to see exactly how Emmanuel Sanders fits into the team because he may be a short-term outside option that then moves inside when Welker leaves, assuming Welker does leave. But I don't know. I think Latimer has a lot of talent, and if he can get in any part of Peyton's run, then I think he has a lot of potential to make a quick impact as soon as he can get on the field.
Yeah, I think so. I definitely can't fault you there. I mean, he's in the top offense in the NFL at the moment, and he could be the number 2 guy as early as next year. So to have that kind of guy this late in the draft, I think is pretty good. So, and that actually for me, I believe we're on pick 14 now. I think.
I already lost count. 9, 10, 11. This is the 12th pick.
12th pick. Okay. So, yeah, I'm sort of going to follow your thinking with Denver, only with Green Bay, and probably take Devontae Adams here. Also, like we talked about, who knows which receivers are going to be in Green Bay next year other than Adams? I mean, they're all free agents. Now, are all of them going to be gone? No, but I just can't see a scenario where the 3 between Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, and Boykin are still there. I can't see that. So I think that leaves Adams to take, to move up at least to the 3rd spot and possibly even the 2nd. And that's another offense that has, a very high-powered, pass-heavy offense that I think, if you have a receiver that's one of the primary targets there, it could be pretty good. So, yeah, Adams at 12 I think is pretty good. I don't think he'll go that much higher than that. I mean, maybe 9 or 10 tops, but I think 12 is probably pretty decent for him, don't you think?
I do, and Adams was the player that I was debating over between he and Cody Latimer. To me, those are as close as 2 players can be close because they have so much similarity just in terms of their situation that I think they're both really solid into first-round picks there. So I guess we are now into the second round of a 12-man rookie league, and here, to me, I think this is probably going to work out for both of us again because of the 2 Jacksonville wide receivers, the one that I prefer in dynasty leagues is actually Marcus Lee, and he is the one that was drafted ahead of Allen Robinson in the actual NFL draft, and I'm taking my cues a bit from the Jaguars here. But Lee was just so good more than a year ago, his previous season in college, before he had a bit of a disastrous junior year. To me, that talent hasn't gone away, and I'm going to bet on it. If he ended up on the Panthers, I would have freaked out because we have a history of terrible USC receivers. But I think he dodged a bullet by not ending up on our team. So I think he'll be okay and could end up being a number 1 receiver down the line because he has that kind of ability.
Yeah, and he might already be there now. I think probably their long-term plan with Cecil Shorts is probably put him in the slot. where they could probably maximize his value there.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, have Lee on the outside. And I think ideally have Robinson outside too. But, yeah, I think Lee, look, he's got all the tools. He showed them before. I don't think there's any reason to think he can't rebound from that. So I'm going off the farm again, Scott. I think for me, I'm a Devontae Freeman fanatic. So I would probably take Freeman here. He's probably already the backup to Steven Jackson in Atlanta. He's got the pass protection chops right now, which means he's going to get on the field sooner than, say, a Trey Mason would in St. Louis, who still has to develop that part of his game. And look, Steven Jackson's old. He's frail. Who knows when he's going to go down next? And Freeman's going to be the guy, I think, that will take over that spot. And Atlanta's another very good young offense that, for the running back in that offense, I think can do quite well. I think it's probably a bit of a reach for most people here at 14, but in a year where there's not that many running backs out there, I think this is one case I would be okay with reaching a little bit.
So I don't think this is a reach at all. I actually have Freeman as my 14th player, although I have both the tight ends that have been picked so far.
We did not collude before this, Scott.
And our own Jeff Ratcliffe, who I respect quite a lot, especially in terms of rankings, I think the term he used for Freeman was criminally underrated on our site. And I think we have Freeman as sort of the 14 to 16 range overall among our rookies. So I think Jeff clearly thinks that Freeman has the chance to be a real quality player down the line. The question for me is he quite big enough? I don't know. He's a little small. I would feel better if he gained a little weight, but that's a possibility. He's not Jack Rogers small. So in that sense, I feel a lot better about him than I ever did about Rogers. And you're right. If Steven Jackson, he may have hit the wall, and if so, Freeman could be the one player making an impact that you didn't expect among the rookie running backs here. Yeah,
to me, he's clearly the top of that sort of second-tier rookie running back level. And there's a couple other guys there, but I think he's probably got the clearest path to that. Okay, well, you've made me a little bit nervous picking these tight ends that I thought that I might not end up with one of the ones that I wanted. So I'm going to go ahead and reach a little bit off my own board here to Austin Seferian-Jenkins. Seferian-Jenkins, I guess you'd say, is my favorite tight end of this class. I have all three players within 3 picks of each other, so I don't think you're going to be doing a lot of wrong. But I guess it's wrong to say that I think Seferian-Jenkins has the most upside, because I think Ebron pretty clearly has the most upside in terms of physical tools. But for me, Seferian-Jenkins has the most likely to happen upside, whereas I have no concerns about his hands the way that I do about Ebron, and you can't teach being that big. So I think he could be, in short order, a guy getting 10 touchdowns a season in an offense that could really work for, especially with some of the other receiving options they have on the outside. He could be a major threat in the slot or in the middle of the field in general. Yeah, and I think, for getting him at this stage of a rookie draft, I think is great. I mean, I think the consensus is there's 3 top rookie tight ends. And I think if you got one of those this late, I think you'd be pretty happy. I know you said it was a bit of a reach, but look, for me, tight ends are the foundation of a good dynasty team. So if you can get, one of the studs here, I think you're doing pretty well. And part of the reason that I have them ranked lower is because all 3 players have a lot of potential. And if you see some of the tight ends going more quickly, I wouldn't be afraid to reach a little bit. Make sure you get one of these 3 guys. If you need a tight end in dynasty, the chances that one of these 3 that are going to work out is just so much higher than anybody else in this draft at the position. So don't be afraid to let the market dictate the picks you make to a certain extent here. There's a lot of wide receiver depth in this draft. You may even get a good wide receiver in the 3rd round. Right. All right, so, the tight ends are sufficiently off my board now, so you won't have to worry about that. This is the 16th pick, by the way. Man, that is, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty now. I know you like Robinson, man. I'm not there yet, so, I'm going to go with a guy I think that's been coming on strong a little bit lately. I'm going to go Dante Moncrief in this spot. He's another guy that joins a good young offense, assuming that they sort of take the training wheels off there in Indianapolis. But it's another guy that receiving core, there's a lot of uncertainty there. I mean, Reggie Wayne is super old and coming off an ACL injury. They did sign Hakeem Nicks to a 1-year deal, but you got to figure if he blows up, probably not coming back to Indianapolis.
I agree there.
They do have T.Y. Hilton, who is a good young player under team control for at least 2 more years. So I think, with him on the slot, I think Moncrief probably has an opening there to make an impact. So, again, this is predicated on the fact that they realize that Trent Richardson is not the answer there, and let Andrew Luck, do what he do, man. I mean, he passes the ball and he's very good at it. So I would go Moncrief there. It's probably a bit of a stretch. It's probably as high as you'll probably see him, but that's another guy that's in that Adams-Latimer mold where there's just a lot of opportunity there.
So the other guy in that offense, Derrick Rogers, how would you break down their chances comparing Moncrief to Rogers? Rogers was sort of a big tools upside prospect that I don't think got drafted, maybe a 7th-round pick by the Bills last year that wound up on the Colts mid-season and had a little bit of a slash down the line. Do you think Moncrief is clearly ahead of Rogers in the pecking order there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they did spend a pretty high pick on Moncrief. I don't remember if it was the 3rd or the 4th round, but it was a mid-round pick when they already had, allegedly, 4 receivers on the depth chart. I mean, I think that should tell you what their feeling is on Derrick Rogers, that if they can get someone that's better in the long term, they will. And for me, I think Moncrief fits that mold. So, yeah, it's there's not that many receivers left for me anyway, but Moncrief would be it.
For me, there is one more receiver. You already mentioned it's Allen Robinson. I think it's pretty unusual that Moncrief would go ahead of Robinson in the draft. There are quite a few analysts that think Robinson is the better of the 2 prospects between he and Marcus Lee. So to me, he belongs more towards the beginning of the 2nd rounds. But Moncrief has more potential than about anybody because he's just a physical freak. So I don't hate that pick, but I think I'm pretty pleased that Robinson fell to me here with, I don't know, maybe this is the 18th or so pick, 17th pick. I kind of lost track again. But I'm very pleased to grab him here. And that way I can hedge my Jacksonville bet because we all know that we want to get every Jacksonville player we can in dynasty leagues right now, right?
Yeah, I'll save Blake Bortles for later for you,
okay.
Scott. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So for me, along those same lines, I would probably go with Teddy Bridgewater here, first quarterback off the board. I think he's a good combination of a guy at a position that is probably going to be the biggest contributor his rookie year, but also could have the highest upside long term too. I think there's a chance he could. And for me, it's all about the offense he's in. I mean, he landed in a very good situation in Minnesota. He's got, of course, Adrian Peterson to sort of carry the load, at least for the first couple years of Bridgewater's career there. He's got Cordarrelle Patterson, who, I mean, this guy is shooting up the dynasty charts every day, it seems like, and with good reason. I mean, his yards after the catch ability is amazing. So I think combine that with a guy like Bridgewater, who the knock on him was not being able to throw the deep ball. So Patterson is a perfect guy to pair with Bridgewater for a lot of short to intermediate passes and just let Patterson go. The other thing about Bridgewater that I love is having Norv Turner as his offensive coordinator. I mean, he seems to be, the quarterback whisperer before Mark Trestman made it popular. So, at least from a fantasy perspective, Norv Turner tends to turn, guys into gold. So, for me, Bridgewater would be my pick there.
Okay, we are, in my mind, beyond all of the upside plays at running back, but there's still a handful of guys here that I think have even short-term flex potentially. And one of those guys, the guy that I'll take here, is Terrence West in Cleveland. Ben Tate is presumably the lead back in Cleveland. We know that he hasn't been the most durable player in his career. If potentially he doesn't work out, West seems to be the presumed backup. That's also not a clear point here either. Isaiah Crowell is there, who wasn't drafted but has a lot of potential. But West to me is the likely backup that I could see maybe being a factor if he gets in any games this year, which is I think is very possible if Tate gets hurt. I don't think he has the potential to be a top 20 player necessarily, but he's a guy that I think can really be an asset for you in the short term.
Yeah, I love that pick. I think, yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about frail, I think Ben Tate's picture is next to that word in the dictionary. So whoever wins that backup job is going to be in a good position to get a lot of carries and start at some point during the season. And yeah, like you said, I think, Isaiah Crowell has the highest upside, but I think Terrence West right now is ready to go and further along than Crowell is. So, yeah, I think having a guy that potentially could start and drafting him this late in a rookie draft is perfect. Okay, so with my pick, and I think we're on 20, I think, or 22.
We're on. This is the 20th pick.
20. Okay. So for that, I'm going to go with another running back. And like you said, I think you're getting into, not guys that I think are slam dunks to start at some point, but you're more flex guys, and that's going to be Charles Sims for me from Tampa. They've already said that the days of Doug Martin running 300 times a year are over. And hey, that's not a bad strategy. I mean, they want that guy to last. But in order to do that, they sort of have to pepper some other guys in. And at the moment, it looks like Sims is going to be that guy. They talked about him being the third down back and maybe even spelling Martin on first and second down. He was very good coming out of West Virginia. And the early reports are he could be a featured back at some point. I don't think anyone's worried about him unseating Doug Martin. But I think he's got the ability to be a pretty good contributor. And just like we talked about with Mike Evans and Safarian Jenkins, that offense is going to be pretty good for a while. So for me, a guy like Sims, who is probably going to be the immediate backup to Doug Martin, that would be my pick there. Okay,
great. Let's see. I'm running out of time to make this pick, and so I'm going to go ahead and make it. I'm going to take Johnny Manziel here.
Yes.
I think that Manziel belongs in the second rounds. I don't think he'll slip to the third round in virtually any league, and he probably won't go even this late in most leagues. But I definitely think that Manziel has the most short-term upside of the quarterbacks here because of his rushing ability. He's the one that I expect will be starting this year. Not that I don't think Bridgewater will either. I think they both have a chance to. But I think that Manziel has a little bit greater upside. So I think he belongs here at the end of the second round. Not really a whole lot else to say. Hopefully somebody like Miles Austin can at least do something this year because without Josh Gordon there, it could be a little bit of trouble at the skill positions in Cleveland.
Yeah, and I expect Jordan Cameron to just go completely off this year. So.
Okay, what are we? Is this pick 20, 22, 23?
22, I think. Last pick I had was 20. So 22, for me, it's between, a guy like Bortles, who I think we can agree is not going to start this year, or at least not going to start many games. So he's definitely a taxi prospect, long-term prospect. For me, this is very unusual for me, but I think I'm going to go Jeremy Hill here from Cincinnati. He's going to, he's running ahead of BenJarvus Green-Ellis in Cincinnati. He's going to be sort of the pounder, the bruiser to Giovanni Bernard's, passer, and honestly more fluid running back in Cincinnati there. So, look, and I think we can agree, Hill is never going to be a guy that's a featured back, a three-down back, but he's going to be a guy I think that could get some goal line carries. He's one of those that has probably a higher floor than a lot of running backs in this rookie draft, but definitely the lowest ceiling as well. But I think at this stage of the draft, you're trying to get value, and for me, I think Hill has some.
Okay, great. This is going to be my last pick, the 23rd pick, so the second to last pick in the second round. To me, I'm going to make a little bit of a situational pick here. I think that we're beyond all of the major receiver names, so I'm going to go back to running back here and pick Andre Williams, who landed with the Giants. He's probably not going quite this high in most rookie drafts. He isn't considered the prospect that a lot of players are, even though he was very productive at Boston College. But I think it's important to note that he really stood up to a heavy workload in college. And while that isn't necessarily a good thing, I mean, you'd rather have a fresh player, I think it is potentially a demonstration of a skill, which is the ability to take the ball that often and stay healthy and stay on the field. Meanwhile, in New York, there's a lot of question marks at running back. And I think Rashad Jennings is one of the most attractive sleeping running backs, but you're talking about potentially a one-year fix. We don't know what we're going to get from David Wilson, and while I still have him ranked fairly highly because I think the potential is there to be a great player down the line, there's also a chance that he won't ever play again. So it's kind of a scary situation there. I mean, it's not inconceivable that a few weeks into this season, Andre Williams could be the only real option in New York just because of the question marks they have at their depth chart. And if that happened, I wouldn't really have a lot of reservations about playing him every week because even though I don't think he's spectacular, I think that he'll be able to get it done through volume.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think, yeah, like you said, Jennings is the only real running back on that depth chart that is significantly better than a guy like Williams. I mean, Peyton Hillis is not going to give him a run for his money. So, yeah, and at this point, you're just looking for guys that have value, and I think that's probably a good pick there. So, with the last pick in this mock draft, I will go with Blake Bortles. It might be a little early for some to be at this stage of the draft, but for me, he's a guy that him and Bridgewater are neck and neck for highest upside, and I think especially if you've got deeper rosters with taxi squads, Bortles is an ideal candidate. They're committed to him. I mean, they know that look, they're not going to throw him out in the fire this year. I mean, Gus Bradley has pretty much said so. So, but I think, with the receivers you mentioned, with Marquise Lee and Allen Robinson, I think the potential there is for Bortles to do pretty well. And at the very least, do better than Blaine Gabbert did. Bring it full circle. So
excellent work there, Michael. All right, we've already taken up quite a bit of time on this show, but I think it was a productive one. I'm not sure if we're going to head into any further depth in a draft, but it's an option Michael and I will talk about. And before I call it an evening, I just want to mention, too, that I just, before the show, updated my Dynasty rankings that you can find on ProFootballFocus.com. I didn't make a ton of changes. I had already updated it with everything that happened after the draft, but some of the major movers included Noshawn Moreno, who I dropped heavily following the news of his surgery. I don't think the Miami running back situation is very clear anymore, and frankly, I'd probably prefer to stay away from it at this point. I brought my longtime favorite Ahmad Bradshaw back into the rankings because I hear that he is healthy, and he's always been productive when he plays, and people forget that. I think he's sort of had to work harder against his 7th-round draft status than anybody ever that's been good that I can even think of. So I brought him back onto the list. Brought Marcus Wilson, the 3rd wide receiver of the Bears, who has been doing pretty good this offseason, onto the list. Everybody else I think is pretty obvious. We touched on a couple of them at the top of the show. But check that out if you're getting started with any of your dynasty drafts or rookie drafts. It's probably worth looking at. And I believe that's it, Michael. Do you have any other final points?
No, this is good, man. We'll see what kind of damage we can do next time.
Okay, that sounds great, Michael. Well, everybody that's been listening, thanks so much, and we'll be back again next Monday with another episode of the Fantasy Slant. Thanks so much.